Hi, I'm Eileen Bild. I'm with OTEL Talk. And today I have another guest that is a contributing author for Mayhem to Miracles. Hi, Jill.
Hi, Eileen. Thanks so much for having me.
You're welcome. So, Jill Landry is a licensed physical therapist. She is also a certified holistic chef and a Reiki level 2 certified practitioner. She is also a certified yoga instructor with 500 hours of training and has developed and taught anatomy classes for both 200 and 300-hour yoga teacher training program. So I'll say, Jill, you must be very much into the holistic and the natural and that kind of environment. Yes.
Yeah, I wasn't always, but it's kind of developed over time. So as I kind of grew an interest for myself and kind of addressing my own health challenges, I started to delve into that a lot more. So, and then I kind of wanted to learn more, and I've always been a lifelong learner. So I kind of delve into things, and I do training programs, and one day I'm going to put it all together and find something that's going to be able to incorporate all of it. I haven't found that yet, though.
Oh, I'm sure you will find that, because that seems to be how our life journey works. And part of it is our stories that we like to tell. That's part of the healing process. And your story in Mayhem to Miracles is about having faith. And so you've always had a special connection with animals, and your story is about that. Unconditional love that animals and humans seem to have. And you're blessed to share your life with 3 dogs who have been your confidant, friend, and teacher. And as you said, you've always been a lifelong learner, and you study both science and creative pursuits, including the holistic modalities that I've mentioned, the culinary arts, and you like dance as well. You look like you've been a dancer. Did you do ballet or?
I grew up doing gymnastics, and so that's my background, and then had some dance training through that, but also as an adult really got into aerial dance, and that was one of my hobbies, I guess, if you want to say. Just really love kind of, if you can picture like the Cirque du Soleil type of dance where they have the silks and the fabrics hanging from the ceiling, and it's just, I think with my gymnastics background, I kind of naturally went there, and so it's something I really love.
I love that. Yes. And I have seen in live performance those kinds of dance. So that's amazing. Awesome. So let's move on to your story in Mayhem to Miracles. And what was it that gave you the opportunity and the idea to write the story in the way that you wrote it? Because you wrote it from both the animal, the dog's perspective, and from the human, your perspective. So I'm going to let you start from the beginning.
Sure. Well, the first part of the story is actually told from my dog's perspective, and her name is Faith. And so that's where the title of the story, Having Faith, really is about having her in my life, but also kind of, also how we generally think of faith and like a having faith or trusting life. So it really has a double meaning in that way. And back in 2019, well, I actually adopted Faith. I'll back up a little bit. I adopted Faith in 2017, and she was 9, almost 10 years old at the time. I adopted her from a senior dog sanctuary in Petaluma, California. And she was a German Shepherd, and she had her primary person that she lived with had passed away. And so the first part of the story goes through kind of her telling that story of how she, where she lived, and who she lived with, and how she came to be with me. And so that was, I actually wrote the story in 2019. And that, when I wrote it, I just wrote that part of it, which was her part. And I actually wrote it for Sacred Stories' first kind of book in this series, the Chaos to Clarity, I think. And I submitted it, and it was actually accepted to be published, but I decided not to go forward with publishing it at that time. And later in the year, actually things progressed such that year, and I go into this in the story a little bit, that Faith's health declined, and she passed away in November of 2019. And at that point, I really regretted not publishing the story. I thought, wow, this would have been really great to have this out, especially now, just as a way of kind of honoring her and remembering her, but I hadn't done it. And I actually remember writing back to the publisher and saying, please keep me in mind if you do another book, because I'm really regret that I didn't publish this and would like to. So the next year came along, they were doing another book. I actually added to the story at that point, and I added, at the time, I did it as sort of like an epilogue, and wrote what happened, after Faith had passed, and started to share the grief that I was experiencing and what that process was like for me. And I again submitted it, and it was accepted, but for some reason it just didn't feel right to publish it. So went on, one more time this year, came around earlier this year, they were doing another call for stories for this book now, Mayhem to Miracles. And I felt like I went back, I looked at the story, and I just wanted to see, there was something that just, I went through actually almost up until the deadline. I was like, I didn't know if I'd have time to do it. I had kind of really pushed it to the deadline, but they said, well, go ahead and send it to us, and we'll see. And there was just something in me that wanted to go back and look at it. And when I did, I realized I wanted to add even more. There was even more of the story that I had lived. And so I really have, every piece of the story, I've really lived it in the last 3 years. It wasn't ready to publish in 2019 because I hadn't lived the other pieces yet. And now looking back on it, I can really see how the story really grew in depth over the 3 years. So there is the first part of the story that was kind of Faith's part, that pretty much stayed the same. But it was my piece of the story that is what changed, and what I added, and that it just got, I was able to, as I went into the kind of a grieving process more, I was able to kind of detail that more and share more of my insights from it, and not only just being in it, but also going through it and being somewhat on the other side of it. I was able to look back and have a different perspective on where it brought me. And in 2019 and even 2020, I wouldn't have been able to share that because I wasn't there yet. So it really was kind of a divine timing type of thing. Like, even though there was this impatience in me and I was disappointed in myself, it just wasn't ready yet. And I realize that now. And I also think that in that time, I was also growing the courage to share it, because it was always, as a child, actually, I just remembered this just a few days ago. I loved to write stories about my dog that I had. And I, even as a project in school one time, I illustrated and wrote this entire like children's kind of story about my dog, and she was a character in it. And so it probably shouldn't surprise me that I'm still doing that. But it always kind of felt safer to share about them rather than me and, what I was going through. And so, this is a story that's really close to my heart in a lot of different ways, just not only my, connection with faith, but what I went through with, grieving her loss. And so it kind of took a leap of faith almost in some ways for me to add the other pieces and then actually have the courage to say, okay, I'm, I feel at a place where I could be ready to share this. So,
well, it sounds like it's been an amazing journey, and that at each of those pivotal points, you became more aware and that courage became stronger. And I think sometimes we're guided by some force that's outside of us, that's bigger than us. If we have that feeling that, right now is not quite right, there's a reason. And it sounds like you had some more of life journey and lessons to learn and things to go through in order for this final version of this particular piece to come to life. And I'm going to bet that there's more that's going to be coming after this that could possibly be, your own book at some point. But it sounds like it's been very cathartic for you, and giving you the opportunity to process all those different stages of grief. It seems that you and Faith were very close.
Yeah, it definitely, I've always processed through writing. So it has really helped with that. And also even just the writing itself, but I can see even now, it's been several months, maybe even since April or May that I, when the final edits were being done, that I had really read the story and, in preparing for today, I went, I'd gone back and I'd read it, and I can see even now, even different perspectives that I have on it, and things that I'm catching that I didn't before. So it's always interesting to kind of look at your own work, I guess.
Absolutely.
And I can see, just, that I really was living that. And it was an incredibly challenging 3-year period of my life that story really spans. So with a lot of loss, but also, a lot of opportunity for growth. So I and like you said, I really think that I'm still living it in a lot of ways. Like, even though I went and published it now, and I think the impact of that time and the things that I learned are really yet to be, fully realized. And, something I wrote in in the story was, and this was part of Faith's part, and I said, together we are rewriting what was a tragedy into a beautiful story of healing and love. And I think that could have tremendous, just endless, I guess, ways that could unfold, I guess, at this point. So.
Yes. And it causing me to think about the kind of connection of she had a loss from her owner passing on, and then you were able to help her um, like heal from that loss that she had, and then now you've had your own loss and you're using her story to heal yourself. And
Mm-hmm.
I think having faith in life itself and what our journey is all about is key in us being able to process and move forward from tragedy that we may have, or a negative experience. You said that as you read through the story again, there were some new things that have come to your awareness. Do you want to share something that not in the story that you'd like to talk about now?
Yeah, I think it's more just around like why I wanted to share the story. When you're kind of in it and it just was like, I'm just writing this, and I didn't ever step back to think of the bigger kind of picture of the story. And when I first wrote it in 2019 and doing Faith's part, what I most wanted to come through at that point was kind of sharing a behind the scenes kind of look at the journey that a dog might go through, after a loss of their caregiver, and what it's like for them, and that they have their own, I guess, and bring to light that they have their own individual journeys and grief and loss that they go through. And, just as we are experiencing it. And also, I wanted to bring to light the kind of the gifts and that can come through like animal communication, because that is a lot of, well, not a lot, but some of where the information came from for Faith's part. It was through animal communication sessions where I worked with an animal communicator that was connecting with Faith, and some of the information came through that. And then, on this kind of journey with her, I also started to learn animal communication, and I was able to connect with her myself. And some of this, some of what is in her part are direct quotes from those communication sessions. So I really do consider her like a co-author in this because it was her words, or at least the interpretation of the energy that she was sharing with the communicator, or sharing, with me. The other parts of it are, the other parts of her story are based on her medical records, or based on what people told me directly, either that worked at the shelter and had firsthand knowledge, or what was told to them when Faith was brought to the shelter. And so that's where a lot of her family background and how she was living before she came to me, that's where all that information came from. So all of it is very true, and I wanted to make sure that it was very true to what had actually unfolded. And so most of that information is from those records, or from the people that first had contact with her, or from the communication sessions.
That's fascinating. And I love animal communication like that, because they do have feelings and emotions and personality.
Yeah.
And, I'd be curious, uh, when you started working with the animal communicator and then started to have your own intuitive connection, um, what would you say was like her most challenging or difficult part of the loss and then transitioning to you being the new owner?
Um, I am trying to think back if there were any communications directly about that. And I think mostly it was probably just an overall sense of confusion, like not knowing what was going on. She actually had another dog that she lived with at the time that her person passed away, and so they were taken to the shelter together, but then ultimately separated. Um, and I used to observe. I had the sense that the other dog must have been a smaller dog than her, because Faith used to go up to almost every smaller dog that we would pass on a walk and be very interested in them. Or somehow it was like she would look, at a dog that maybe was far off, and it was almost like she was looking for her for a while. We did actually have the opportunity to meet with the family that adopted the other dog, and her name was Summer. And it ended up that we were only about an hour and a half apart. And we got together one day, and they spent several hours together and seemed to recognize each other and got along really well. And this was about 6 months, I guess, 6 to 8 months before Faith passed. But I asked, that was something I just felt like I really wanted to do for her. And, it was just an idea that came, and it ended up unfolding really easily. And it was like, it was just kind of meant to happen. And some of the information actually in the story came from meeting them. I actually wrote the initial part of the story a month after meeting them. And I asked Faith after we met, and this is actually after I had already started to build my animal communication skills, that I asked her, what did you think about seeing Summer again? And she told me, I know that she's loved and she's safe and she's taken care of, and I don't need to worry about her anymore. And I think the most impactful part of hearing from her about that was she said, it feels like it's supposed to be. It's the way it's supposed to be. And it's just, I think I know, as a growing animal communicator, I, still have my doubts, about, if what I'm receiving, feels true and real. And when it's that simple and that clear, like, I just know that it's not my mind making it up, because, anything coming from the mind is going to be really complicated and have a story behind it. But it was just so clear, and just like, it's the way it's supposed to be, and just this level of acceptance. And it just was like, wow, and I think she just had a really sense of peace afterwards.
It sounds like it was an opportunity for both of you to recognize that everything's going to be okay.
Yeah.
It's part of the journey of life and death, and
Yeah.
having that opportunity to be with someone, but like you said, to accept the fact that it ends at some point, and everything's okay. And perhaps, and perhaps that's been part of your ability to process, the loss. And I would think because you were able to communicate with her, you were kind of feeling a double loss, because you were feeling her loss as well as knowing that you're going to lose her, and then you went through the transition of faith, and it seems like you're coming out through this really strong with um, thoughts of moving forward with the courage and the ability to take these lessons and share it with others so that they too can be inspired by the story that's behind the dog or animal, because it doesn't necessarily have to be a dog, but
Right, exactly. I think that that's what I kind of started to realize. And, as I look back at the story is, and part of why I'm recognizing I did want to write it. I think so many people can relate to the grief that comes with the loss of an animal and also loving an animal. But I also think on a society level, it's often misunderstood. I mean, I think grief is misunderstood in general in a lot of ways, but especially the grief over an animal, I think is not often honored in the way that, it might be honored in different other situations. Like it's not as important, or you should get over it quicker, or whatever the other, the stories are. And I being a really empathic person, I think sometimes I'm cautious to tell other people about that I'm, maybe grieving a loss of my dog, or this is because I don't want to have them say, like, look at me, like, what do you mean? Like, you're still feeling this. And it's been almost 3 years, on November 5th, it'll be 3 years, or 2 years. And I still have times when I intensely miss her, and it's not like I'm completely over it. I think there's always a part of me that will always grieve her physical loss, but I can also see now, and this is what I talk about in the story, in my part of it, is that the gift that can come in being with the grieving process, and that there is kind of a different perspective that can be had on it, and it can actually be a really transformative process if we allow it to be. And I think that there's this emphasis on kind of moving on, and getting forward with your life, but I think it's more of if you can allow it to be a moving through, it can actually change you in a way that you can start to see a deeper meaning coming from it. And I was really searching for that deeper meaning, because I didn't understand why I had adopted Faith. I had a dog that my dog Barstow had passed in 2014, and it took me 3 years to really be even willing to adopt another dog and bring another dog into my life. And I didn't understand why I went through that and then only had her for almost 3 years, but a little less than 3 years. And a good part of that was watching her decline through the chronic illness that she had, which was degenerative myelopathy, which is basically a disease of the spinal cord where the white matter deteriorates. And so there's a loss of communication between the brain and the muscles. And so she lost function and ended up that she only had really control of her head and neck by the end of her life. And we still got her out and used a cart and harnesses and all of that. And she was really engaged in life for really, until the last few months of her life, where it was obviously a lot harder for her. But, I just think that there, and I forgot where I was going with that, but so hang
Oh,
on, I'm
that's
just gonna
okay.
get
Well,
my thought back.
that's okay. I think what what the message is that I'm hearing is why you were chosen, so to speak, to take her in and nurture her and nurse her through those final stages of her life. And it seems that it was all in divine order, that it was for her just as much it was for you, that you're a very compassionate, loving human,
Mm,
and she needed that in her life at that time because she had a loss.
mhm,
And she, when someone's in pain, and well, in this case, the dog was in pain and going through a pretty traumatic ending of life, and you have the capability to hold that space for that, in this case, that animal,
mhm.
to go through that in a loving way. So I can definitely see why you might have been chosen and why you were guided and had the intuition to adopt her. And I'm sure as time goes on and you read the story again and you do more of the interviews, that you'll start to get a little bit more awareness of that why, and it'll help you with that healing process. I can also agree that whenever we have a loss of a human or an animal, uh, it's human nature to uh, have grief and to hold on to the memories and what that person or that animal has meant to us. And you know we tend to feel them in different ways. So I'm sure that whatever her favorite place was to sleep or to play, whenever you're in that space, I'm sure you feel her and have
Yeah,
experiences
absolutely.
like that.
Yeah, absolutely. I think having that connection still helps for sure. I mean, it's not an easy process, as anyone knows that's gone through this, to lose the loss of the physical is really difficult. But to still have that connection and still have some piece of it really does make a difference, I think, for me. And I hope that that's also something that will come through this story, is just that connection can continue. And that's something I have been learning within the last 5 years. I didn't know that before, but you know I talk about in my part of the story about a quote that I heard someone speaking about on grief. It was actually Michael Beckwidth, and what he said about finding purpose and meaning in the loving of them and also in the loss really just changed my perspective on the grieving process itself. And I think that that's also part of the what I want to share is that there can be a bigger purpose at play. And it's really sad and it's really hard, and I don't want to dishonor any of that, because it feels like being in the trenches with it sometimes and like you're never going to get through it. And I still have those moments where, like I said, I feel it. And I went Faith's loss wasn't the only loss that I went through in that 3-year period that I was writing this story. I had a few other significant losses in that time. So the grief has really been compounded for me. And I think that's why this story became so important to tell, because I couldn't get away from it. It was there. And, but being able to start to see it it from a different perspective and to find purpose and meaning and richness through it. You know, I think if everyone could start to maybe see the possibility of that, it would just sparked a little light for me, and when I was in a really dark place. And I just want to send, I think, that message out.
Well, it sounds like the meaning behind that message is that we can come through it and we can come to the other side, and that we don't have to stay in that dark place of that grief and the sadness of the
Yeah.
loss. And I think it's wonderful that you have that animal communication connection, because it gives you a bigger perspective of the realization that they're not just animals, that they have just as much an importance in the journey of life that we do as humans. So thank you for sharing your experience and your story. And two last questions. Where can people find you? And any last like words of wisdom if someone has recently lost a pet or is dealing with one that they're about to lose, and anything you'd like to pass on to them?
Sure. Well, people can, probably the best way to reach me right now is email. So I'm happy to chat with anybody that might have questions, but my email is jlandry, Landry 78 @gmail.com. I also happen to be doing house and pet sitting right now, so I do have a profile on Trusted House Sitters, and you can read more about me there. And words of wisdom, for someone that might be, approaching the end of life with their animal companion, I have a lot of compassion for them. It's not an easy time at all, but I think the words of wisdom I would have would be just to stay present as possible. Try to keep your heart open, as hard as that is, but I think something that I have found myself doing a lot at the end to try to fix or just keep doing and finding answers, and there's definitely a place for that, but don't miss the times of just being. I think that I remember those the most now. And I would also, if you are open to animal communication, I think that that's just a really rich time to connect with an animal communicator and hear from your animal. There's just so many, I think we put ourselves through a lot of grief and worry about how to handle the end of life process. And I think a lot of times hearing directly from your animal about how they feel and what they're going through, and maybe even what their last, how they kind of want to have it be at the end of their life, can help bring a lot of peace to a time that's not so peaceful. So that would be, my words of wisdom there.
Thank you. So, and I have a quick question about that. Do you offer the opportunity to be an animal communicator, and or do you have a reference that if someone emails you, you can refer them to someone?
I am not fully trained enough to do that yet. I do hope to be at one day. But yes, if anyone emails me, I could certainly provide several different references. So.
Awesome. That'll be great. Well, thank you for being on my show. It's been wonderful to hear about your story. And again, her story is having faith, and Mayhem to miracles. And we will see you again in the near future.
Thank you so much, Eileen. I really appreciate it.
You're welcome.